Okay, so we are going to figure out what kind of inheritance pattern matches with this particular pedigree. Um, the three steps that I gave you earlier, you should have opened up and with you so that you can follow along and know where we're at. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out whether or not the gene is perhaps dominant or recessive. And in order to do that, we just count the number of affected individuals that's in every generation. So if you remember, your generation numbers are basically written out as Roman numerals. So in this pedigree, there are 3 generations. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 people that are affected. But notice that no one is affected in the second generation. Because there's no one affected here, okay, we're saying that the trait skipped a generation. So if it skips a generation, it's likely to be recessive. Okay. Now, the next thing that we look at is the number of individuals that are affected and what their genders are. So we have 2 of them that are male and 2 that are female. Because it's a fairly even split. Okay, now in this case it's exactly an even split, but sometimes if we'll have 1 more male or 1 more female, right, compared to the other gender, it's still a 50-50-ish split. So in this case, we're predicting that this is autosomal. Okay. Because it doesn't depend on the gender, this inheritance pattern is likely autosomal recessive. Oops. Okay. So that means our third step is to test it out to see whether or not this actually is autosomal recessive or not. So the easiest thing for us to do, okay, in an autosomal inheritance pattern, we often should identify the recessive individuals first because we know what their gene types will be. And in this case, we will use the lowercase letter r to represent all of our recessives. Okay. Because it's also autosomal, we can use just the uppercase. Oops. Sorry. Uppercase r's to represent all the dominant individuals. So every person that's not shaded in is likely to be dominant, and they're likely to have at least 1 dominant allele. So we write in all the dominant alleles. Now, we do need to fill in the second allele. So to do that, we look at a smaller family. Okay, so let's look at this family here that's off on the left. We have a recessive individual in generation 3, and then we have 2 normal parents in generation 2. But in order for those 2 normal parents to give the recessive, each parent must be heterozygous. And if that's true, then when we look at the first daughter in this 3rd generation here, the first daughter, all we know is dominant, but it could be dominant in terms of homozygous dominant or heterozygous dominant. If both are possible, we use our blank. So big R blank represents both homozygous dominant and heterozygous dominant, because it could be either a big R or a small r. Okay, so we figured out this side of the family. It seems fine. Let's figure out the next larger family. So again, we see recessives in the offspring, in the F1 generation. So that means the parents must be heterozygous as well. And if that's the case, then all the dominant ones could be either homozygous or heterozygous. So we leave it as big R blank. So once we have that done, let's move on to the main family. okay, from generation 1 to generation 2. We know that the father is recessive. Now, the mother, we know, is big R. But when you look at all of their children, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children. Out of 5 children, and none of them are recessive, okay? Because there are 5 children that are not recessive at all, okay, it is very likely that the mother is homozygous dominant. Okay? And in that case, the mother gives all the dominant genes to their children, while the father gives all recessive genes to the children. So all the children are heterozygous. So this is the reasoning and the rationale, okay, that we use in order to figure out the genotypes. And because everything worked out perfectly, okay, everything is plausible, then this genotype is likely to be autosomal recessive.